And we have a better idea of what measures Governor Abbott may push for this legislative session. He laid out his playbook in last night's State of the State address. Eyewitness News reporter Erica Zucco breaks it down.
There weren't really any surprises in the governor's State of the State address, but he did mention some hot button issues that we can expect to be big topics of discussion this legislative session. Abbott began his address by mourning the lives lost to coronavirus, and then he touted what he said still makes Texas a, quote, economic engine. In response to the businesses that have been hurt by the pandemic, he proposed balancing the budget to ensure no taxes will be raised, civil liability protections, and plans to protect businesses if a future pandemic occurs. Other things that he talked about included passing laws to prevent defunding police departments, making changes to the bail system, measures to, quote, secure the border, more gun rights laws, and measures regarding what he called election integrity. He also talked about expanding broadband access, increasing civics education, making alcohol to go permanent, and deregulating telemedicine. And he also talked about putting limits on abortion. He didn't give specifics on all of these measures, just mentioned that they're priorities. The Texas Democratic Party released a live stream on its Facebook page, hosting people from across the state, where they talked about what they called insufficient response to the pandemic. Reporting in San Antonio, Erica Zucco, KENS 5 Eyewitness News.